Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. How many people don't know the meaning of that chant? It means homage to the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the fully enlightened one. So these are epitaphs or kind of names or adjectives to describe the Buddha. And they all point to the stature of, being of saintly character and perfect in conduct, the mind fully illumined, enlightened, and worthy of offerings and respect. Teacher, so that's often the way that people would introduce, Dhamma Talk, or before other types of chanting before taking the refuge, as we did on the first night, and so on. Before I forget it, I wanted to mention about tomorrow is the new moon day, and that is in the Buddhist tradition, this Theravada Buddhist tradition, one of the observance days, or like the two special days of the month. Actually, there's four, but they're based on the moon, full moon, new moon, and each of the quarter moon and 3/4 moon. So it's like once a week, basically, there's an observance day. So it's similar to have Sundays in Christianity. They have 4 days a month that they have people go to church. So it's similar to that in the Buddhist tradition. Although the quarter moon and 3/4 moon are not really observed too much by most of the Buddhists, and even the new moon is not so much observed, but the full moon is the main sort of monthly religious holy day when the people make more effort to go to the temples and practice meditation and so on. But in the monastic life, the new moon and full moon days are, they observe those with some special monastic procedures and so on. So normally we in the monastery we use that day for kind of extra practice. So we get up we start meditation at 3:00 in the morning. We meditate from 3 to 6, and then we have a puja after that. But because of the retreats going on, then we often modify that. But so tomorrow, anyway, I wanted to encourage people to start to take the middle path, 3:30. And so this is the schedule for tomorrow. So we get up at probably 3:00. I don't know if anybody's going to ring the gong, but set your alarm clocks. We're not forcing people to come, but I'm encouraging you to, kind of just give the extra effort. This is part of the extra effort to overcome our laziness or craving for the bed and all that. So we'll meditate for an hour and a half. You can do, of course, sitting and walking and standing. And then we'll have the yoga as a kind of little intermediary break to boost your energy, hopefully, and then from 5 to 5:30 like we normally do, and then come back for the last hour. So that's, just wanted to mention it before I forgot that. So are all of you game to try that? Especially some people are morning meditators, others are evening meditators, and some are both. I'm going to try to go over these questions pretty quickly so we can they don't take so much time, but try to make them part of the talk. So where did the original idea of the self come from? The first being to have that delusion. Where did it come from? Babies are born without a self delusion. How can they be carrying karma from self-delusion? There's no first point. The Buddha didn't put out a first point when the first ignorance arose in the world, or the first eye consciousness, or even the first human being, for that matter, or the first point of life. The Bible gives a very nice, little story. It all happened on a certain day. In 7 days, everything was done, and so it's people can believe that. But the Buddha didn't point that out. He didn't believe in, of course, that sort of a creation theory. It's more sort of an organic evolution, probably more in accordance with something like Darwin's theory of evolution, rather than things were just created all at once. So there's no first point when the first beings arose. But he said time is beginningless, basically from beginningless time. So, the baby is born with the seed of ignorance, the seed of self-delusion, although it's sleeping in him. And it's reawakened when he, after a few months, and when he gets a name and people start paying attention, and the memories and the habits, and gradually from the sankharas that have come with the rebirth, gradually start to assert themselves. That's why babies have greed, desire, and very quickly they start wanting to grab things and so on. So, and that ignorance, of course, is coming from the previous life, and I'm going to talk a bit about that in the main part of the talk. If everything is impermanent, what is permanent? The only thing permanent is nibbana. And that's something that can't be easily described. Or the unborn, unconditioned element. Or you might, just to use popular modern jargon, ultimate reality. But it's that state of, beyond dualistic consciousness. If you want to call it pure awareness or what, but it's, even those words don't probably do it justice. So it's beyond all ability to really try to define it in words. But that's why the Buddha simply called it the end of suffering. And he left it at that. Nibbana. So the actual word nibbana means the end of suffering. Vana meaning craving, or the end of craving. But craving and suffering are basically synonymous in the Buddhist psychological perspective. And ni is like nirvana. The popular word is nirvana. So vana is the word for that craving, mental craving. And the ni is a prefix to negate. So the end of suffering. Or we call it the unborn. That what was never born and never dies. Or the deathless. We call it amata dhamma, the deathless state. He gave ways how people can train their mind, their bodies and minds to meditate, to experience that, but no words can adequately describe what that would be, it's totally, revolutionary, or in terms of our, when we experience it. Can we say the will is free for one who is liberated from the ego? Yeah, you could say like the Buddha or enlightened person who's not motivated by greed and hatred and self-interest. But they still can decide to do something. But that's not being decided by some selfish motive or any other defiled state. It's called just functional. They get up, they go on their alms round, they collect food, and go back. They either meditate or they teach. People come to them, teach, and So you could say it's free will because it's free from greed, hatred, and delusion. But we don't really have a free will because it's dominated by conditioning and by that greed, hatred, and delusion. We say we have free will, you can decide, but we already covered that last night. That's not really free, necessarily, in the deepest sense. Is pure awareness also moment to moment, just like consciousness? There's many different levels of what you'd call pure awareness, but in our consciousness, in our normal consciousness, we look around and we focus on individual things, and we come up with their names and labels, and usually we think about them, and we're singling out things one at a time to focus on. But with the sort of expanded, what we may call more pure awareness, the mind isn't really focusing on any objects. Objects are just arising and passing away like bubbles. Imagine your aquarium at home with the pump on. All these bubbles are just coming up within the water. So awareness is simply the space in which bubbles of the five aggregates just arise and pass away. So it's not really noticing things moment to moment in that way. So again, you just have to experience what that's like to really kind of understand what it's like. But things just arise sort of spontaneously on their own in this very large, expanded space, without the kind of reactions that normally take place. We have done so many actions past karma in the past years. So is it right to assume that we are going to take another rebirth and suffer? Or can we reverse this by becoming a monk or a yogi? Yeah, come join the monastery. 3 months, 3 days, and it's over with. I'm joking. Yeah, I'm going to touch that in the talk I'm going to give after this. What is the giant monster surrounding the wheel of life? I guess referring to that the Tonka painting that's hanging on the wall inside there. That monster is called Yama, the Lord of Death. And it's holding the 12 links of dependent origination in its claws and feet. And on its head, if you look at it, there's 5 skulls. Those represent the 5 aggregates: form, feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness, which themselves are undergoing birth and death all the time. And it's those 5 aggregates then that are, and in the center of that diagram there's greed, hatred, and delusion, depicted by a chicken, a snake, and a pig. Pig represents delusion, the chicken, greed, and the snake, hatred. Although some people have different interpretations, but anyway, that's the way I learned it. And then outside of that, there's the 6 realms of rebirth, where the mind will take rebirth, depending on its karma. Human realm, Deva realm, the hells, animal world, and the fighting demons. And then that outer kind of outside circle with the 12 spaces in it are the 12 links of dependent origination, or the Paticca Samuppada that I briefly mentioned in one of the talks the other day about the contact, craving, grasping, becoming, and birth. So anyway, that's just the monster. The death has all that in its clutches, because everything that's conditioned is doomed to death, change, and death. So, as I kind of hinted at, I'm going to talk about kind of the overall framework in which our practice of meditation kind of is based on or unfolds, and especially some of the kind of theoretical framework, because to get a kind of a larger global perspective on the situation of the mind and suffering, then one needs to have a larger picture to make it make more sense. And so that's where it includes the idea of the karma and the rebirth, as one of these questions was referring to. That, where did this mind come from? Where did we come from? We find ourselves born as a little baby and grow up, and all of a sudden, here I am, and I have this body and in this world, and what the hell's going on? How did I get here? What is this? If you've seen the latest edition of my autobiography, it's a red cover book in there. There's a little baby picture of when I was a baby there. And I have a really funny expression on the face, like, and there's a caption, "Again?" So, from the Buddhist philosophical point of view, not only the Buddhist, of course, but from the Hindu, most Eastern traditions, the idea of rebirth is an important aspect of their worldview, and that this mind just didn't originate at your birth in this life, and that those 3 factors of greed, hatred, and delusion are called the 3 roots of suffering and the 3 roots of defilement. And basically they're also the fuel which drives the wheel of birth and death, as depicted in that wheel of life. So that's why the greed, hatred, and delusion are in the center, in the hub, and that's what powers the process of the mind. And there's no first point at when this mind arose, or our individual karmic continuity. But when you die, the accumulated greed, hatred, and delusion, and the karmic, all the force of the karmic patterns, is carried over to the next life. And it's said that one would be reborn depending on certain aspects of that karma. And according to that theory, we've all been going through all those realms of rebirth, experiencing every type of suffering and even every type of happiness that there is, and experiencing the results of our karma. So, of course, the goal of the Buddhist meditation practice is to gain insight. Ignorance is the thing that drives that wheel. So until we gain wisdom, when we practice meditation and gain insight and wisdom, then we can start to reverse that process of accumulating karma and to gradually slow down the force and drive of the greed, hatred, and delusion, and also purify our karma, so that we will start minimizing our suffering. Because the suffering we experience is largely due to, again, that accumulated karmic patterns and the results that come back to us when we keep repeating these types of unskillful actions of body, speech, and mind. And karma is even more than rebirth, but karma is more important to understand in terms of our meditation practice, because that's what we're trying to purify. It's the karma which determines sort of the state of existence. And karma sometimes is seen as reward and punishment. Or when something, in this Western world now, karma has become a kind of a household word, and you hear it bantered about on, radio talk shows, or even on some, TV programs or something, or, it seems like, something bad happens, a person says, that's my karma. But if something good happens, praise God. But karma simply means, the word karma means action, deliberate action. So actually we experience the result of our karma, which is called karma vipaka, or the result of karma. And that will result either in painful feelings or pleasant feelings. Pleasant experiences, painful experiences. So what I said, the pleasant sensations and experiences you experience now in this life is a result of having done good karma in the past. And the painful sensations that you're experiencing in this life, not just body sensations, but I'm talking about other painful types of, relationships, misfortunes, and whatever, even sometimes diseases and other types of calamities, mental suffering, is a result of this accumulation of the unwholesome type of karma. And so we have a balance. We have both of that. We all have done a balance and a mixture of good and bad karma. That's why sometimes our lives are going fairly good, but at other times, things happen to cause us pain and suffering. But all those things are impermanent. We kind of, when we are able to skillfully work through a certain kind of karmic result, we can kind of, be done with that karma. And karma is a very difficult thing to try to explain perfectly. And the Buddha said it's one of the unfathomable, that you can't really figure out all the intricate, complex details about the law of karma. But whatever happens to us in our life should be seen as a challenge. And karma is actually an evolutionary tool. We need it in order to evolve. So if we keep on doing certain actions and we keep on experiencing painful results of those actions, it's a wake-up call. Whenever some tragedy happens in your life, whether it's a sickness to yourself or to a loved one or a friend or anything else that involves you in that involves all kind of worries, anxieties, or fears, or any types of suffering, we should see that as a challenge and ask ourselves, okay, what is this teaching me? This has come to us as a lesson in life to learn from. But if you just run away from the experience and try to suppress it or hide from it or create some artificial reality, then you're not learning the lesson that particular experience is trying to teach you. Such as, and some of these lessons might be like learning the lesson that everything's impermanent. So if a loved one dies and you're grieving, you're imagining that this person's supposed to be permanent. And so you haven't dealt with the law of impermanence and knowing that death is natural to people and death can come at any time. Or some other type of tragedy, your house burned down, you lose everything. This is a lesson also in impermanence, but also in non-attachment. A lesson that you can, live just as well without so many possessions, perhaps. Or if you get a terminal illness, it's also teaching you about death and to let go, or to accept reality. Or if you're burdened with any other number of types of situations, if you have to wind up taking care of a loved one, get saddled with having to taking care. Maybe that's your lesson in life, to learn compassion, to learn selflessness, instead of just doing what I want to do. You're given a lesson that you have to care for a loved one with all kind of unpleasant things. So like that, whatever comes to us in life, there's kind of a reason for it, a karmic reason to learn from, and some lessons to be learned. So we should see it as a challenge and learn those lessons. But if you fail the challenge, if you don't learn the lessons, then you have to come back and perhaps repeat it later on. If you flunked a grade, you have to retake it again. So rebirth is you flunked a course. You have to come back and do it again. So the path of practice is about that, working through these karmic knots and the five aggregates, going through them and working through whatever karmic knot you have with material matter, working through the karmic knot you have with sensation, with perception, with volition, and even with the consciousness. Now, I wanted to mention there's 3 levels of basically defilement. In our mind, we have what is called defilement. That means basically greed, hatred, and delusion are called the 3 main defilements. And all other types of emotions and negative mental states like jealousy and envy and arrogance, and just a whole range of types of mental states are spin-offs of greed, hatred, and delusion. And these have three levels. The level that causes you to create karma and transgress the precepts. So we have strong greed, hatred, and delusion. And if we're not able to check it, then it causes us to do negative actions like kill, steal, lie, cheat, deceive, sexually abuse people, intoxicate the mind, the whole gamut of kind of negative, unskillful behavior. So that's called the level of manifestation, where those defilements manifest as karmic actions that then would bring their results. In the practice of sila, the Buddhist Eightfold Path, the path to the end of suffering, is divided into the three groupings of sila, samadhi, and panya, or skillful behavior, mental composure, and wisdom. But it's the not living a disciplined life, breaking all the silas and just living a indisciplined life is what causes probably at least 90% of the kind of problems and conflicts that we have in ourselves and with our family members, with the world at large. And the accumulation of those things that we have practiced in the past. And even though we're changing now, we might not do those unskillful behaviors, we're still experiencing the result of what we had done in the past. So the practice of sila, by consciously taking the precepts, whether it's 5 precepts, 8 precepts, lifetime precepts, or precepts of a monastic, all these precepts are designed to prevent that stage of creating the negative, the heavy types of negative karma, the transgression of the boundaries, you might say. Because the precepts act as like a boundary in which we kind of conduct our life, not to go beyond the boundary of killing things, go beyond the boundary of lying or other types of negative speech, the boundary of stealing, the boundary of sexual misconduct, the boundary of intoxicating our mind. Because these are the things that bring us heavy, painful results. If not immediately, then down the road also. So by practicing sila, you can minimize at least a lot of that unwholesome behavior or negative behavior that causes us overt and types of conflicts. Because you suffer from guilt, worry, remorse, and fear. Guilt, worry, remorse, and fear are mental suffering. But most of it stems from having not lived a disciplined life, having broken those precepts. Or you may not even know about the precepts, but just doing those things because you're worrying about getting caught. The fear of getting caught, looking over the shoulder. You can't sleep at night. Somebody's going to find out you told that lie, or you slept with somebody else's husband or wife, or you stole something, or you did something else. Or having remorse about it and worrying. So by practicing sila, you can at least overcome a lot of that unnecessary guilt, worry, remorse, and fear. But then the next level, that's not enough, because still the thoughts in your mind will come. Sila, the practice of sila, at least prevents you from creating the actual karma. That becoming that we mentioned before, the stage of becoming. But you still might have thoughts about it. The sila might prevent you from cheating on your income tax, but you still might like to. It's a nice idea. Or you might like to tell somebody off, right? But at least you curb your tongue, so you don't get into some difficulty by that. But still, you'd like to do that. Or you'd like to sleep with somebody else's husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever. But the painful consequences of that. So, at least not doing it, you won't incur that type of fear and worry. Or the other precepts. But you still might like to. So the sila only goes so far. But at least that's a very great achievement. Because it's easier to control our body than control our thoughts. That's why you can make your body walk slowly, right, in walking meditation. But it's harder to make your mind move slowly. Because even though you're walking slowly in walking meditation, how fast is your mind moving? Anybody ever notice that? So it's easier to control the body than control the mind. That's why the Buddha had to start with sila. But that's also because the heaviest type of karmic results come from the actual physical and verbal actions that we create in life. The thoughts also create karma, but they usually just affect you and not others. But when you actually go out and start doing actions and speech that affects others, and you get tangled up in this web of the outer tangle. So then the practice of meditation or concentration addresses the next level of the manifestation of the thoughts. So the thoughts come into the mind, but with mindfulness we can prevent when we're aware of the intention, we can withdraw that energy from the intention and not commit the karma. But as we practice meditation and improve our mindfulness, we can note these thoughts of desire, aversion, and the other sort of negative thoughts. And if our concentration as mindfulness is strong enough, then those thoughts won't stick in our mind. And when you reach a deeper level of concentration and mental calmness, then those thoughts wouldn't even arise in your mind. The thought to kill or steal or cheat, lie, deceive, or whatever, and intoxicate your mind. People intoxicate their mind because their mind is low and they want to get high or forget their problems. But in meditation you do that naturally by tuning into the underlying deeper natural state of purity and tranquility that is there, and it's available if you know how to access it, in which you wouldn't want to get high, because that's a higher state than any kind of high you could get by intoxicating yourself or by even some sexual experience or anything else. So the practice of the samadhi or the concentration helps to purify the mental agitation and the thoughts. But that's only like pushing head of a jack in a box down into the box, and you put the lid on it. What happens when you take the lid off? Boing. The head pops back up. Because it has a spring, this spring on it. So by, determined concentration and by, the effort to concentrate, you might suppress your errant thoughts and desires and experience some, peace of mind. Just by sheer concentration, the ability to just keep the mind right there and don't let it wander. And so you can attain this tranquility of mind. But again, it's just kind of like pushing the head of the defilements down. They temporarily go to sleep. But as soon as you let off of that concentration and start into more activity, then it's like taking the lid off, it springs back up. So even the practice of calming your mind, attaining peace of mind through just concentration practice, is also not enough. Because there's what is called the latent tendencies. So defilements have their root in the very, in the unconscious mind. Like coals simmering underneath the, underneath the ground or underneath some wood and so on. If you had a fire, maybe the fire dies down. The fire would be our fire of greed, hatred, and delusion when you have a bonfire. But then it dies down. So the obvious fire went out, but if you look under the coals, you see the coals are, still red hot. And if you stir them, sparks will come off. Or if you blow on it and put some more twigs on top, it'll start burning again. So the same way with our latent tendencies. And in the Buddhist sort of meditation psychology, they're called the fetters. The underlying tendencies, the fetters that are there in the mind, and they manifest and come up when the conditions are right as being the hindrances. So it's only the Vipassana meditation, the development of insight, which addresses or goes down into the unconscious mind and quenches those coals, or cuts the root of the defilements, uproots greed, hatred, and delusion. In another analogy of about the the fetters and the roots, apart from the jack-in-the-box, is, you go out and cut your lawn. You might have a lawn, a shaggy lawn, or a bunch of weeds, like the grass back out behind here. It grows tall and all scraggly and doesn't look very nice. So you get the weed weeder out and you mow it down. Or you mow your lawn, and then it looks nice and even, looks nice and green. And it looks nice for a while. But then after a rain and some sunshine, it starts growing up again. Or the weeds, you go out and pull just weed whack your weeds out in the garden. And then they come up again. And why is that? Right, you didn't get the roots. And so they come up again. So it's the practice of insight meditation, the practice of following the Satipatthana Sutta, Vipassana meditation, however you want to call it, which deals with going through those 5 levels of the aggregates and working through the karma of each one of them, and then getting down to the very source of the mind itself, which is the ego consciousness that I talked about last night. which is the root delusion. The root delusion is the thought of I am, or the thought of I, me, and mine. Because it's from that all the greed and the hatred arises from that, to satisfy this I. So, the practice of insight, as you work through the aggregates, as you traverse from the conscious mind or the gross mind to the subtlest mind, you directly perceive and experience the intricate workings of the aggregates and in their interconnections. And by developing mindfulness and restraint, you're able to stop change your reactions. You're able to change your ways of acting and reacting by seeing the intention. You can withdraw that action on the intention and gradually purify the karma by not acting upon that desire or that aversion or that intention. You can withdraw the energy from it, and that energy then becomes the energy of deeper concentration and deeper mindfulness. And so it's through that practice that, on the one hand, you purify your neurotic types of reactions and are able to then practice sila much better. But then on the mental level, you're also able to change the way that you think. And by developing wisdom and understanding, and by cultivating right thought, like those three right thoughts of the thought of renunciation, the thought of non-ill will, and the thought of non-cruelty, by substituting those our negative thoughts of greed, hatred, and delusion with those right thoughts, we can change the way that we think and calm down our thought processes. And that will allow us then to reach the deepest level of the mind, which is the consciousness, and understand how the nature of the self and the ego. And to know that, ego and desire are like two sides of a coin. And as long as we have this ego, there will always be the tendency for desire and aversion to keep occurring. So again, the practice of insight meditation is to see that whole process clearly and to have the means of being relaxed and centered, and the means to restrain your negative thoughts and actions, so that you can, make a transformation in the nervous system. You can transform the nervous system from a neurotic and indisciplined one to a more centered and calm and equanimous state. Now, there was a question also about, what is the entering the stream? Well, through the practice of, the insight meditation, when you are able to, as we mentioned, let go of the knower, let go of the known, and let go of the knower. And as you are able to allow the mind to expand and more awareness, there's no room for the little I to kind of gain any footing. And at some point, that sense of I and self and separation may totally dissolve. And you can experience, what's beyond dualistic consciousness, to experience the unborn state, or the unconditioned, which is beyond the egoistic divisions, or experience the truth, to experience the end of suffering, at least temporarily, as an experience. That's called entering the stream, or the first stage of enlightenment. And it's called entering the stream because it's such a powerful experience that it destroys 3 of those fetters. I mentioned there's 10 fetters. The first 3 are the belief in a self. That's the biggest and strongest of the fetters. It's the unconscious underlying sense that, this consciousness belongs to me and I own it. And just the sense of I, me, and mine. So you clearly transcend that even temporarily. It might have just been for a brief moment. But it's so much in your face that it changes you. And you overcome your doubts about it. Before you still might have had doubts. Is the self real or not? I don't know. It seems to be. And, you might reach some states where, the sense of self was, almost gone. Maybe there was just some faint little glimmer in the background of, I still there, or you could have been, even deluded and getting into some hypnotic state where your sense of self maybe not there, but you just didn't see it. And so, these doubts might still be there. But with that experience of entering the stream, because it's so clear that it's said to destroy your doubts about it, and that you overcome the belief in the self. And so this means overcoming the belief in the self, not overcoming I consciousness. Because after that experience, the sense of I will still come back in your mind because of the force of habit. But now you know that it's an illusion. Whereas before you didn't. Before you were still placing all your hopes on it. Or before you were still worshipping it. Or before you were basically, still believing in it. And following it, all of its whims and fancies. But now you, at least even just intellectually, you know that it's an illusion. So that helps you to that extent. So it's said to be a great achievement, even in that you're no longer conned by the games of the ego. Even though it's still there, but your awareness is such that you wouldn't be conned into doing any of the negative types of karma. It said that you wouldn't do any of the real heavy types of karma that bring you suffering, because your mindfulness is, and awareness is at least to some extent there to prevent that. Even though you still have desires and aversions and normal states of mind, but they're not going to cause you to do the heavy types of negative karma that could cause you serious pain or affect your negative rebirth. So anyway, that's called entering the stream. So it destroys 3 fetters of personality, belief, doubts about it, and also what is called attachment to rites and rituals. Now that you know that no external rites or rituals, like just chanting a mantra or walking around Mount Kailash 3 times or 100 times or bathing in the Ganges River with some holy water, any of these type of things is going to purify your karma. Because now you've understood how it really works in the mind, and it can only be purified through your own development of the path. Not by any external things, or no external person can also save you. So these are beliefs and rituals that you no longer believe in. Although, you may still practice some, but you don't believe that they're the way to attain enlightenment. I might have a desire to go to Mount Kailash and go to Mount Kailash, but it's not for that purpose. It's just to be out in nature and get some exercise and things like that. But there's a difference in whether you believe that this type of rite and ritual is going to take you to Nibbana or something. So, anyway, that is kind of the path of how the Sila, Samadhi, and Panya, or the morality, concentration, and wisdom play their role in the practice of insight meditation, or the practice of the spiritual path, the path leading to the end of suffering. So it's a very gradual path. And it is said, even if a person attains the stream entry, you could still have enough karma left for 7 more lifetimes in samsara. But if you want to believe the idea that this mind has been moving through the realms of samsara from birth to birth for virtually millions of lifetimes, to have only 7 more left is a drop in the bucket. So that's a great thing in itself. But that's if you are very negligent. If you don't get complacent with just becoming a stream winner. That one could go on to attain the other levels of the once returning, never returning, and the arahant. I'm not going to go in them because it's too complicated to explain right now. But each of those stages weakens and removes more of the fetters. But the fetters are removed through the development of insight, both concentration and insight. They have to be developed together. There's a big debate nowadays in the meditation worlds about concentration versus insight, and whether you can attain enlightenment without, developing your concentration to a high level, or whether you can attain enlightenment in just doing concentration and not vipassana. But if you read the Buddha's teachings, it's very clear that those are not mutually exclusive practices. But concentration is used as actually, there's 3 things that go on. First, you practice mindfulness. Mindfulness is what you've been practicing mostly in these days, the effort, the struggle just to keep your mind, lifting, stretching, hearing, the struggle to keep your mind kind of coming back, to stay in the present moment. So, you're practicing mindfulness, the effort to exert to be mindful. I forgot to see the intention. Okay, let me be mindful. Lifting. So anyway, as you practice that, hopefully at some point you get more focused and you become more concentrated. So actually, this is where I want to mention about the 7 factors of enlightenment, or the 7 factors of awakening. I briefly mentioned them already. So the first one is mindfulness. And it's this basic beginning mindfulness. Become mindful of what you're doing. Try to be mindful of your thought. Okay, anger is arising now. Greed is arising now. Pride is arising now, and you try to check it. And as you go on being mindful, of course you're breathing, practicing being aware of the breathing, developing concentration, and then the mindfulness of your actions and thoughts. As you keep on practicing, you get more concentrated. The 5 hindrances get kind of weakened. And you're able to check your thoughts more quickly, and they don't start bother you for so long. You overcome your drowsiness. The mind becomes very clear. So, and then the second is investigation of Dhamma. You investigate what's going on. Like examining the body is just 32 parts, there's 4 elements. You examine the aggregates, how they're impermanent, and how if you cling to them that cause you suffering. And how they have a will of their own, there's no owner or controller of them. So you investigate by observing over and over and over again from different angles. It's called investigation. When you do that investigation, it's like a scientist doing an experiment. I don't know if you took high school or college biology or chemistry or physics, when you do some experiment. When you're getting close to your experiment, you get really absorbed and interested, right? And you get toward the end of it and you keep discovering things. Maybe you could go on the whole night, you don't want to sleep because you want to find out what's around the next corner. What's under the next leaf. So investigation leads to energy. Because you become very kind of excited about what you're discovering. It's like you're getting close to something. Like somebody, searching for gold, and they're close to discovering it. They wouldn't even sleep. They go day and night to try to find it. So the same way in the practice of the insight, that investigation leads to energy. So you could go on practicing. You could sit through pain because you're using that pain to investigate it, and getting benefits of being able to sit through it and see it for what it is. And that leads to joy. You get happy because you see that you're making progress, even if it's just to endure that pain a little longer. Or the progress to check your thoughts a little bit more sooner. Or the other little, benefits that arise in your meditation. So you get happy. That's called happiness. And that leads to the mind and body becoming very relaxed and tranquilized. All the neurotic movements and so on. You stop trying to itch this and scratch that and look here and there, because it's, your insight and investigation has developed to that extent. So the body and mind becomes tranquilized. It's called tranquilization. Body and mind tranquilization. It comes from the happiness. And then that's the fifth one. Then the mind becomes concentrated. Concentration comes at the end, not at the beginning. So that means the mind becomes really concentrated. The hindrances are no longer arising. You're right there, moment to moment, seeing things arising and vanishing. It's a very concentrated state. Like having turned up the power of a microscope to 200 or 300. And seeing in it, you don't want to move an inch because the mind is so absorbed. That's concentrated state. But it's not concentrated on one object. It's concentrated in the moment, not being disturbed. So that state of concentration has come through this mindfulness and investigation and insight. And then it becomes concentrated. But at this point, when the mind becomes concentrated, it boosts up to a higher level. Whereas before it was maybe still on a fairly low level. But a level enough where the hindrances would be suppressed. The mind becomes very light and clear and focused. And then it attains that concentrated state, to the state of jhana. And you don't come out of that to practice vipassana. That's another debate that goes on in some meditation circles. You have to come out of jhana to practice vipassana. But if you read the Buddhist suttas, he never mentions that. He says, from the jhana, then you bend your mind toward the destruction of the defilements there and then. He doesn't say you come out and do it later. There and then. And so, that strong concentration boosts the vipassana up to a higher level. It's actually, that's when it becomes vipassana at that point. Whereas before you were practicing mindfulness. But with the added value of the concentrated state, that's like turning the power up from, let's say, 50 to 200. And then the clarity of arising and vanishing becomes crystal clear. Whereas before it was, maybe clear, but still, a little bit fuzzy and, not spot on. But with the added addition of the concentrated state, then it becomes crystal clear, and at that point you could attain enlightenment at any time, because the mind is so clear that it would penetrate through the last veil of ego delusion and be able to, break through the conditioned mind to the unconditioned. So, actually, after concentration comes equanimity. That's the seventh factor of enlightenment, the last one. And the equanimity comes from the insight that you've developed, that you're no longer disturbed by pleasure and pain or by the fluctuations of everything. The mind has understood that basically everything is empty. And so it becomes equanimous, but still fully alert. And if you maintain that equanimity long enough, then the mind will flip from conditioned to unconditioned. That means the last thread of ego consciousness will dissolve. And you can momentarily experience that the transcendence. So that shows that both concentration and mindfulness, they're interdependent and they support each other. The more mindfulness you have, the more you will be concentrated. And the more you are concentrated, the more bright and clear your mindfulness will become. And then that will allow you to attain even a greater state of concentration. And that concentration, making more calmness, will allow that mindfulness to become that much more clear and bright. And that will in turn allow you to gain a deeper level of concentration. So it keeps on going back and forth like that until all those 7 factors have been developed. And at any point, then the mind can make a breakthrough. So I just wanted to kind of, explain that to try to kind of, round out the whole picture of where the practice of meditation, especially the practice of the insight meditation, fits into the larger kind of scheme of the spiritual path. And so those 3 levels of the practice of the panya, the wisdom, is what. The wisdom is directly seeing how the mind works. The wisdom is seeing how that the ego exists in relationship to desire. And you see that corresponding reduction in the mind's desire and identification. The sense of self gets correspondingly weaker and weaker and weaker. When the mind starts having the craving again, you can see that ego or thought of I then, gain in strength again. So that's direct observation. That's the wisdom of directly seeing how that process works and how it can be totally even overcome. And that's what cuts the root of delusion, of ignorance. Not just suppressing it down, but going down underneath. It's like going in your garden and pulling up the weeds. You actually, very carefully, you cut around the weed, and you make sure you get the taproot. Because if you only pull off the top of the weed, or just a few of the little surrounding roots, then it can still, the weeds, they're very clever things, very strong things. They can grow, anywhere, because they're clinging on to life. You can see there's some plants growing out of our blacktop over there by the office. Right out of the blacktop and tar, somehow they're eking out life, because that's the strength of the ego, and it'll cling on and want to hold on to life at all costs, and so it's very resourceful. And so you think you've gotten rid of it, but it's still existing down there, again. So you always have to kind of be on your guard, and with the mindfulness to see if it's coming up again. So just to finish with just one other little analogy of those three levels of the Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. Like the observance of the precepts. That's like building a foundation of a house. You want to build a house, you have to have a good foundation. Especially you live in these cold climates where it freezes in the winter. So if you try to build a house just on top of the ground or on sand or loose soil, when the ground freezes in the winter, it'll break the house in half. And the ground will be heaved up and the house will split. Or the flood, an easy flood will just wash the house away. But you have a good foundation, sunk down and filled with concrete. So that foundation is like our practice of morality, like living by the precepts. So that what is the flood that will wash our practice away? The flood of guilt, worry, remorse, and fear is what will wash our practice away. So if we try to meditate but we still are not leading a disciplined life, and we go to meditate, we'll be worrying about this or that, or having fear of somebody's going to find out and you get caught, or just that restlessness of not being disciplined, of just acting on your impulses without thinking about them. That comes from a restless nervous system. So it washes away whatever little benefits we got from meditation, or whatever little calmness we might have got from it, get quickly washed away by the worldly winds. So once you have a foundation, then you build a house, the frame of the house. So building the frame, the four walls, and putting the rafters on that connect the walls. That's like concentration. That means being concentrated in the practice. Knowing what you want to achieve in the practice, and not being distracted by so many mundane, unnecessary things that are trying to always divert you. And by developing your mind and concentration, so you're not disturbed by the little itches and scratches, or the insects flying around, or whatever other things might be going on, you're able to, stay focused and develop your meditation. So that concentration is like using good construction techniques to tie in the corners of the building and the walls so that it forms a kind of a rigid frame, with the rafters that go out to the walls and make it rigid. So when strong winds come, or even a hurricane, it will withstand the force of the strong wind. And the winds are the 8 worldly winds of gain and loss, pleasure and pain, fame and ill repute, shame and blame. These are the things that bend most people's lives, break most people's lives. But those things don't affect somebody who's concentrated, or any other types of, things, disasters or catastrophes or misfortunes that might happen in your life when your mind is focused. It doesn't get easily shaken by the impermanence. So the winds is the winds of impermanence. Things change. If we get sick, you lose your job, you lost your stock market, all these things. Because you understand these things were always possible. And you have a resource to fall back onto, which is your inner peace of mind. So the concentration is like building the frame. Then what's left? What still needs to go on the house? Come on, you carpenters. The roof, yeah. The roof. So the roof is the crowning glory. Once the roof is on, you can go in, you can sit in that house and in the summer or the winter and live in comfort. So the roof is wisdom. And the roof is what protects us from our crooked ideas, or protects us from sealing out Mara and delusion. But if the roof is leaky, what happens with a leaky roof? Yeah, the water will get in and start rotting the wood, rotting the frame, rotting the ridgepole, the timbers. And mold will start growing on inside of your house. And become an unhealthy place to live. And eventually, if we're going on and check, the house will fall down. So, wisdom, prevents the defilements from creeping back in. So that's how, just an analogy of how those 3 aspects of the skillful conduct, or sila. And actually the word sila is interesting. It comes from a word to cool, or at least one definition of it. Cooling. So the practice of sila cools you down. That means it cools the fire of greed, hatred, and delusion. By following the precepts. It helps to weaken and soothe the fires of greed and hatred. Or Bhante Ji sometimes defines it as it seals out the defilements, or seals out suffering. So that's also an equally good way to see it. And then that allows you to sit down and to meditate, so that when you meditate, you won't be harassed by all these hindrances and things, and so that you can develop your concentration, and then it becomes much more clear. Okay, I think maybe gone on long enough.